It was a quiet Monday morning at Willow Creek High School, the kind of morning where the sun painted soft gold through the science lab windows, and the faint smell of chemicals and chalk filled the air. Miss Elena Carter stood in her spotless white lab coat, aligning glass beakers, test tubes, and neatly labeled solutions. Her students adored her calm nature and the way she made even the most complex reactions sound simple. But beneath that calm exterior, Elena carried a past few knew about, a past forged in steel and discipline, something that would soon awaken in the most unexpected way. Outside, in the school parking lot, trouble was brewing. Greg Walters, the self-proclaimed king of the neighborhood and the Homeowners Association HOA president, was in one of his usual moods. Known for his arrogance and temper, Greg enjoyed asserting control wherever he could, even in places that didn't concern him. That morning, he stormed onto school grounds, shouting at the janitor, claiming that the unauthorized charity event Elena had arranged for underprivileged kids was an infringement on HOA property rules. The janitor tried to calm him, but Greg wasn't the kind of man who listened. He barked orders, his voice echoing through the hallway until Elena herself stepped outside to see what the commotion was about. The moment she approached, her calm demeanor seemed to irritate him even more. "Mr. Walters," she said softly, holding her clipboard, "this is a school event, approved by the district. You don't have the authority to interfere." Greg's jaw tightened. "I am the authority here," he snapped, stepping closer. "People like you think they can just ignore the rules, teachers, tenants, nobodies." Elena kept her composure. "Sir, I'm asking you to leave. You're trespassing." Something in her steady tone, the lack of fear, ignited his fury. Before anyone could react, Greg lunged forward, his hand wrapping violently around her throat. A chorus of gasps filled the hall as students froze mid-step, their eyes wide in horror. Glass shattered, Elena's clipboard hit the floor, scattering papers everywhere. "Don't talk to me like that," he snarled, tightening his grip. "You'll learn to respect me." But in that instant, the calm in Elena's eyes turned to something else, not panic, not helplessness, but a cold, razor-sharp focus. Her body instinctively shifted into a defensive stance, a motion so swift and controlled that it seemed almost rehearsed. The students barely had time to blink. With one precise move, Elena twisted her wrist, freeing herself from his hold, pivoted on her heel, and drove her shoulder into his chest, sending the bulky man staggering backward into a lab table. The impact knocked over a rack of test tubes, and a bottle of solution splashed across the floor. Greg landed hard, groaning in disbelief as he clutched his arm. The silence that followed was electric. Every student stared, stunned. Miss Carter, the quiet, kind teacher, had just taken down the most feared bully in the neighborhood. And for the first time, Greg Walters realized he had picked a fight with the wrong woman. The sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance, but inside the lab, everything felt frozen. Students stood like statues, phones in hand, eyes wide in disbelief. Miss Elena Carter, their calm, kind teacher who never raised her voice, was standing tall and composed, while Greg Walters, the HOA bully, sat on the floor clutching his wrist and groaning in humiliation. The janitor hurried to call the police, his hands trembling as he spoke into the phone. Elena took a deep breath and straightened her lab coat, her voice cool and steady. "Everyone step back," she said firmly, her tone commanding yet controlled. "No one touches anything." The authority in her voice was enough to make even the loudest kids obey without question. They'd never seen her like this before. There was no fear, no trembling, just a kind of quiet power radiating off her. Greg glared up at her, red-faced and furious. "You're finished," he spat. "You just assaulted me. I'll make sure you lose everything, your job, your house." Elena didn't flinch. She crouched down slightly, her eyes level with his. "You put your hands on me first," she said, her tone cold and precise. "And if you ever touch me or anyone else again, you'll regret it more than you can imagine." Something in her eyes made him falter. It wasn't just confidence, it was something deeper. A silent reminder that she'd faced far worse men than him before. Moments later, two police officers entered the room, their radios crackling. The students began whispering, telling them how Greg had grabbed her first. The officers separated them immediately. Greg tried to speak first, waving his HOA badge as if it meant something. "She attacked me," he shouted. "I'm the president of the Willow Creek Association. One of the officers looked unimpressed. "Sir, we've got multiple witnesses saying otherwise. You need to calm down." They turned to Elena. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied simply, her breathing even, her hands steady. "He came onto school grounds without permission and physically assaulted me. The cameras will show everything." That was when Greg's confidence began to crumble. Cameras, witnesses, students recording. His reputation, his power, was slipping away in front of everyone. As the officers cuffed him, Greg shouted over his shoulder, "You'll pay for this, lady. You don't know who I am." Elena's reply was calm, almost detached. "Actually, Mr. Walters," she said quietly, "you don't know who I am." Later that day, the videos hit social media. Within hours, the Iron Teacher was trending. Clips showed her calm stance, her lightning-fast defense, and her composed expression as the police led Greg away. No one had seen anything like it. That night, as she sat alone in her quiet apartment, Elena looked at the news buzzing on her phone. Her past, the one she had left behind, was coming back to the surface. She had served 10 years in the military, trained in tactical defense and crisis response. She'd hoped never to need those skills again. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The next morning, Willow Creek was buzzing. Every news channel had picked up the story: teacher defends herself against HOA president assault. Social media was flooded with comments praising Miss Carter's courage and composure. But while the town hailed her as a hero, Greg Walters was already scheming behind bars. Using his influence, he filed complaints, hired lawyers, and even tried to twist the narrative, claiming Elena had attacked him unprovoked. For most people, that might have been intimidating, but Elena Carter wasn't most people. She had spent a decade serving her country in the military, working in crisis zones, where survival depended on discipline, intelligence, and strategy. She knew how men like Greg operated: loud, arrogant, and convinced that fear equaled control. So instead of running, she prepared to fight him the right way, with truth, evidence, and the strength he could never break. Over the next few weeks, Elena gathered her case carefully. She retrieved the school's security footage, collected student witness statements, and uncovered something unexpected: a string of complaints against Greg from other neighbors, all silenced through HOA power plays and intimidation. He had been using his position for years to extort money, threaten residents, and cover his tracks. Now, his arrogance had finally exposed him. When the court hearing day arrived, the entire town seemed to show up. Teachers, students, even residents from the HOA came to see what would happen. Greg entered the courtroom in a tailored suit, his smirk back in place, the same fake confidence he'd always worn. Elena entered quietly, wearing a modest outfit, her hair neatly tied, her posture strong and unshaken. But when she took the stand, something shifted in the room. Her voice was calm, unwavering, every word sharp and deliberate. "This isn't just about me," she said, looking at the judge. "It's about how people like him use power to silence others. I'm not the first he's tried to bully, but I'll make sure I'm the last." The judge leaned forward, impressed by her poise. Then Elena's lawyer presented the security footage, the witness statements, and the HOA records she'd unearthed. One by one, Greg's lies collapsed. His smirk faded. By the time the verdict was read, he wasn't the powerful HOA president anymore. He was just another man exposed by his own arrogance. Greg was sentenced to several years for assault and financial misconduct. The HOA board dissolved under investigation, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. Outside the courthouse, students cheered and reporters rushed forward. One student held a handmade sign that read, "Respect the Iron Teacher." Elena smiled softly and said to the cameras, "Courage isn't about fighting back with violence. It's about standing up when others want you silent." As she walked away, sunlight glinting off her service pin, the crowd applauded. The bully's reign had ended, and a quiet teacher's strength had become a legend.